Got quite a welcome, everybody, to the Legal Women Voters of Nashville Hot Topics. Today, we are going to be discussing mis, dis, and malinformation. But just to give you a background, for those of you who are new to our talks or our series, on the first Friday of every month, the Legal Women Voters of Nashville hosts an online speakers who brings hot topics to our city. And as I mentioned, today we're going to explore mis, dis, and malinformation. But just to give you an idea about what we're going to be doing for the rest of the month, in November, you can join us to learn about the new Chinatown development from Joy Stiles, who is a Metro Council District 32 representative. Joy is going to share her thoughts and experiences in Nashville's development and impact to the communities outside the city's center. And then in December, our final hot topic for the year will feature John Guider. There was a recent Nashville Scene article that people may have seen about a background to his Duck River journey that he started a few days ago. Also something that I think he's posting to a Facebook page. The Duck River, for those of you who don't know, is one of the most diverse rivers in the United States, and it's also threatened because of water being removed from it and other reasons. So what he's going to do is going to spend, I don't know how many days, but certainly by December he'll be back, and he's going to talk to us about that journey that he's taking down the Duck. But as I said, for today, we're going to talk about mis, dis, and malinformation. And our speakers are Melissa Mallon and Emily Bush, both from Vanderbilt. Ms. Mallon and Bush are going to help us learn how to identify and counteract misinformation with a special emphasis on voter misinformation. In an election season that is pretty rife with misinformation, and I think putting it mildly, misinformation, identifying it, and even having and ways of overcoming it are even more important to learn about. So they have promised this is going to be an interactive session. So please be prepared to either add questions to the chat. Also, if you have a question that you would like to add, both Melissa and Emily have said that they'd be happy to have take questions along the way. And we usually have time at the end of the session for more questions. So who are our speakers? Melissa Mallon is an associate university librarian for teaching and learning at Vanderbilt. She leads colleagues in the Vanderbilt libraries in planning, developing, and implementing programs for instruction and learning for faculty and students across the university. This includes the use of educational technologies in library instruction, assessment of student learning, and supporting the holistic student experience through embedded librarianship and outreach initiatives. Ms. Mallon received her master's from Louisiana State University, and prior to Vanderbilt, she was a faculty member and librarian at the University of Pittsburgh and Wichita State University. She's been flying around. Mallon has published, presented, and taught professional development courses in the areas of academic library leadership and management, online learning, instructional design, and the impact of information and digital literacies on student learning. Emily Bush is an instruction and digital learning librarian at the Vanderbilt University Library. She works in the teaching and learning department, developing information literacy, instruction, and community outreach initiatives. Ms. Bush is a lifelong Tennessean who previously worked as an instruction librarian at Nashville State Community College. At Nashville State, she developed a media literacy course for education majors. Emily's expertise extends to teaching media literacy across diverse age groups ranging from teenagers to adult learners. She recently completed Media Education Lab's nationally recognized professional development program geared toward preventing violent extremism through media literacy education. I cannot imagine two more capable people to bring us information about disinformation and how to counter that. So with that, Melissa and Emily, we are very excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much. That was a great introduction. We are so excited to be here with y'all today. We were very pleased to make the connection with the League of Women Voters Nashville chapter, and just really, you're going to see soon how passionate we are about this topic. And so we really like the opportunity to be able to broach some of these really, really important issues with different audiences. So thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. We've got a lot to cover today. And one of the things that I want to just say right at the beginning is that there is misinformation, disinformation, all of the things that we're going to talk about today. There is so much to cover, and there is not any way we could cover even a drop in the bucket today in the time that we have together. But our hope is that you will learn some strategies, you will learn some techniques for really stopping and thinking about the kind of information you may be encountering during the election season, but that you'll be thinking about this a little bit longer term as we go through. So this isn't just information you can use to combat or mitigate mis and malinformation during elections. It's for your whole life. So kind of have that going through your head as we're going through today. Okay. So again, here we are. We're so excited to be here with you. Emily and I have talked a lot about these topics together and with different audiences. And so again, we're really pleased to be here with you. So what are we going to actually talk about today? And we will, in addition to this session being recorded, we're also very happy to share our slides at the end. So you'll have all of this information packaged together. But we're going to start out by talking a little bit about some of the things that lead us to fall for misinformation. There's sort of a misconception, I think, or maybe an expectation that we are a little bit more savvy and that, you know, I would never fall for misinformation. I'm a smart person. I know what I'm doing. But we're going to talk a little bit about how easy it is to actually fall for misinformation, just based on the fact that we are all human beings that are infallible. So we'll talk about what that looks like, then how you know when you're looking at misinformation, and then probably the most important piece of this, which is how to avoid and stop the spread of misinformation. So before we jump in to this, we just want to have a quick, very informal in the chat, if you could share if you have or think you have encountered any election misinformation during this particular election cycle that we're in. And if you have, why did you think it was misinformation? So if you've got anything that you would like to share that's maybe top of mind, go ahead and drop that into the chat. The debates. Okay. Not yet. Okay. AI generated photos. We definitely are going to be talking about AI today, so stay tuned for that. So, quick question. I'm seeing a lot of comments that are, I think, coming from the debates that have taken place this election cycle, at least within the last month or so. What tipped you off to thinking that misinformation was being shared? If anyone would be willing to put that in the chat. Okay, so I've seen social media, family members.
I think, I'm looking at the chat and at the immigrants eating pets story that just will not go away. And I think it, immediately tugs at people's heartstrings, like pets, what, like personal. And it's, harmful to this fuzzy thing, feeling that we have and emotionally about pets. And so I immediately like, yeah, no, that's not even a thing. Even if I hadn't heard the other thing, I'm like, that's so unrealistic. it's got to be wildly
Mm-hmm.
uh, amplified, extrapolated, exaggerated, and can't possibly be true.
Okay, so I'm hearing that you had sort of a combination of like an immediate emotional reaction that kind of set you on this path of like, wait a minute, maybe there's something to check in here, as well as just the extreme exaggeration of what seems to be a very unrealistic fact, right? So that's great. These are all things that we're going to be talking about today. Okay. Okay, that's great. So if you have other things that you want to share, please feel free to do that in the chat. We're going to not necessarily talk about specific rumors or types of information that has been shared, because there frankly is just a lot of it out there to try to combat all in one moment. But we are going to talk about resources that help you identify and deal with and kind of do that sort of deeper dive for some of these issues that you may be hearing about or encountering. Before we get into a little bit more detail there, we thought it would be helpful to start just with some definitions so we're all kind of on the same page here of what we're talking about.
Yeah, so there are a lot of different terms used for misinformation, disinformation, and misinformation has pretty much become the blanket term. And you'll probably hear Melissa and I just use the term misinformation or disinformation kind of loosely throughout the presentation. But the main difference between misinformation and disinformation is the intentionality. So disinformation is intentionally spread, whereas misinformation may be accidentally spread or there may not be any malice intended. Other terms that you'll hear, rumors are unverified, usually doubtful information, but it could turn out to be true with verification that circulate among people. Misperceptions are personal beliefs that are inconsistent with the best publicly available evidence, such as scientific or statistical evidence. An example of that would be my husband once told me that cold water boils faster than hot water. And I was like, wait a minute. So that was a misperception of his. Malinformation is factual information taken out of context to create a meaning that may create harm. And we've seen a lot of this election cycle, taking an image out of context, putting a new caption with it, editing a real video down to change the context of it. And then the final definition we have here is conspiracy theory. That is a theory or belief used to explain a series of events. They often include powerful entities hiding the truth. And usually people who are engaged with conspiracy theories feel like they are helping the greater good in some way, that they're fighting an evil. Next slide. So why are we talking about this? So the World Economic Forum back in January listed misinformation and disinformation as the greatest short-term threat. So they were measuring the greatest threats to the world over 2-year and 10-year terms. Misinformation and disinformation was the greatest threat in the short term. Next slide. Okay, so misinformation, disinformation, and conspiracy theories tend to proliferate in proportion to curiosity and attention. So naturally, in an election cycle or after a breaking news event, we have this need to seek out information to fill in the gaps in the narrative, and social media makes it very easy for opportunists to capitalize on that moment, particularly after breaking news events. So while news events are unfolding in real time and journalists are trying to fact check and only present what has already been verified, these bad actors may jump in and spread disinformation or misinformation. If you look back to July on the when the attempted assassination of Donald Trump happened. Within minutes, there were conspiracy theories flying from both the right and the left. Next slide. Okay, so with that, we wanted to, or Melissa will be talking about something that I think we might not think about a lot, the biases that we hold and how those might affect the way that we perceive this information.
Thanks, Emily. So I think, we've hinted at this a little bit already, and we will definitely talk more about antidotes as we move forward. But it's first really important to understand what the underlying impact of biases and the roles that we all play in either falling prey to or even spreading information, misinformation. And one of the things that we're going to talk about that has actually been mentioned as an antidote in debates, even the idea of fact checking. We're going to talk you through some strategies there, especially related to AI. But it's not a perfect process because, again, as we indicated, we're human beings that have a lot of cognitive biases that we fall prey to. And so it's really important to stop and recognize what we may be not realizing is something that we're bringing into this sort of fight to combat misinformation. So we've already seen this mentioned by a lot of you. Melissa mentioned this a little bit earlier in her comment, that there's definitely a place for feelings and emotions that will help us, more harm us, really, in terms of realizing that we're encountering misinformation. And part of that is confirmation bias. So this is when our own actions and personally held biases are attributing to the way we engage with media. So we didn't really get into this with your comments earlier, but I'd like you to just be thinking, and you can feel free to add some of these comments in the chat, but the types of feelings that you associate with the spread of misinformation or disinformation. There, I think, is a lot of outrage. There's a lot of just kind of frustration and confusion, fear, quite possibly. And then there's also this idea of just wanting to kind of step back and not look at things that don't really fit with the way that you're perceiving the world, that may fit with your morals, with your code of ethics, whatever it may be. We also fall prey, I think, a lot to a desire for quick answers. So individual biases will contribute to our willingness to believe or to share or even repeat information that's confirming our point of view, whether that's, again, politically or socially or otherwise, because it's easier. We believe what we believe, right? And sometimes you don't necessarily want to push back against those unpleasant truths. And I really do think it's important to realize that this happens on both sides of the political spectrum. So I think there is often a the one side is the one that's spreading all of the misinformation or falling prey, but that it's important to remember we are all part of this together. Part of the problem, part of the solution. Another interesting sort of kind of phenomenon, I guess, to share that we feel and have seen to really contribute to the idea of spreading mis and disinformation is something called novelty hypothesis, which is when people want to be the first to share new information. So this happens a lot with natural disasters. With Hurricane Helene recently, you probably saw a lot of videos being posted on social media. If there is a political issue that happens in your state, any number of different types of topics, there's this kind of like initial serotonin rush of I'm sharing information. I'm a citizen journalist. I'm on the streets. I'm seeing what's happening and I'm sharing that with the world. But that also then contributes to not pausing and making sure you're sharing accurate information and you have all of the facts. There was a really interesting study done pre-pandemic, but definitely still relevant now, from MIT that looked at Twitter, which is now called X, found that they looked at bots versus humans spreading misinformation and found that humans were more likely to spread fake news, and that fake news spread more easily and quickly over time than factual or accurate stories. I don't think that's a big surprise to many people, but it is something that has been studied and is true. And so again, this kind of goes to this idea of the human psychology of liking new things. So something to kind of keep in mind there. Let's look at some other biases that may come into play. So this is just a quick quiz for you, which you're welcome to put the answer in the chat here if you would like, or you can just think about it. What phrase followed "to be or not to be" in Macbeth's famous soliloquy? If anybody wants to take a guess there, throw that in the chat. What followed the phrase "to be or not to be"? Okay, that is a question. Oh, Debbie, you've proved my point. Thank you. So if you heard the full thing that I said, what phrase followed "to be or not to be" in Macbeth's famous soliloquy? It was actually, as Debbie noted, not Macbeth, it was Hamlet. So this is an example of something called knowledge neglect. And there's some really interesting studies out there on this. Dr. Lisa Fazio at Peabody College at Vanderbilt has done some really great research on this particular phenomena. Knowledge neglect is basically having relevant knowledge stored in your head, a lot of these kind of cultural pieces of information, but you fail to use that stored knowledge to spot incorrect information. And then you may inadvertently go on to use that incorrect information in other situations or to share it in casual conversation. This happens often when stories, news or otherwise, contain both factual and incorrect information. So using the debates as an example, again, we know that there is both factual and infactual information that's being shared. Infactual is not a word. Incorrect, non-factual information being shared all at once. And it can be hard, your brain may know what's true or not, but then when it's all kind of mixed up together, it can be hard to sort out. So just one thing to think about there. And again, I think this one in particular can fall into your own emotions. Like, yeah, I know that. I know Shakespeare. I took Shakespeare in high school. I know the phrase "to be or not to be," but then you're kind of forgetting about that Macbeth piece. Okay, so next up we've got the halo effect. So this is when positive impressions of a person, a company, a brand, even a product in one particular area positively influences your opinion or feelings in other areas, or maybe not positively influencing, but sort of coloring or kind of putting a little bit of a lens over your opinions in other areas. So one example of this is assuming a person's beliefs, values, political viewpoints based on their appearance or where they're from. I think we see this in the South very often. It's also used in marketing, and this is a good moment to remind you that politicians are always marketing themselves, so they could very much be using some of these tactics. This particular example I just wanted to share as a good example is assuming, say, that Procter & Gamble is an altruistic company due to their donations to animal conservations. We've all seen this sweet, adorable little duck covered in grease and oil that's getting, cleaned up with Dawn, which is a Procter & Gamble product. So maybe you just assume that a company that does something like this will support the kinds of political views that you may have, or would not be active in sharing misinformation. So I was also going to use this as a moment to plug a resource called the American Democracy Scorecard, which is a really great tool if you have not used that, that you can look up different companies and see where they've put their actual efforts and funds and support in terms of different political issues. Okay, next we've got the Dunning-Kruger effect, which you probably have heard of both this and the imposter syndrome. The Dunning-Kruger effect is sometimes referred to as the Peter principle. So this is an enhanced idea of what you know. It's basically just at its core inaccurate self-assessments. So an example for this might be that you may self-rate how much you know about different political topics when you're listening to a debate, when you're hearing a candidate speak. You may just assume, because you're an informed voter, that you know all of the facts that go into a particular issue. You may know that, but likely you probably don't know as much as you think you know. So kind of checking that just a little bit. And then on the other end of the spectrum is imposter syndrome, which is just not trusting your knowledge or expertise, which can have kind of a similar, even though opposite, a bit of a similar pull in terms of how much you're willing to believe or buy into. And then finally, we've got the overconfidence effect. So this is a similar cognitive bias, but it's a subjective confidence in your judgment, that your judgment is reliably greater than the objective accuracy of your judgments. So it's essentially when your confidence is systematically exceeding accuracy, implying that people are more sure that they're correct than they actually deserve to be. So an example would be for this, that you're overrating your skills, thinking, I don't need to fact check, or maybe assuming again that you know for certain different facts or research without needing to confirm it, because say it's your field, maybe you are an educator, you're a political scientist, and you think that because of this overconfidence effect that you know everything there is to know and you don't need to fact check, which we are here to tell you pretty much always need to fact check because of these biases. So I'm going to turn it over to Emily to talk a little bit more about what that looks like.
Hey, I wanted to start by sharing this quote that I ran across in an article from Nature. Misinformation might sway elections, but not in the way that you might think. And I'll read the quote in case the text is small. Misinformation does not have to change minds about politics to have an impact. It can, for example, mislead people about when and where to vote, or whether they should do so at all. Furthermore, just knowing that misinformation is out there and believing it is influential is enough for many people to lose faith and trust in robust systems, from science and healthcare to fair elections. So I thought that this one quote from the article made two really great points about one, the possibility of misinformation changing our behavior and suppressing votes, and the other, the influence that it's already had on our institutional trust here in the US. So some things to think about, the greater implications of misinformation before I shift into talking a little bit about how you can fact check in your personal lives. Okay, so first and foremost, try to avoid repeating and sharing misinformation. If you haven't fact checked and you're not sure, try not to share or like, but also try to avoid that temptation to correct people in the comments on social media, because that can amplify the post. If it does contain misinformation, even if you're correcting them, more people will see it if there are comments attached to it. So some questions to ask. First off, what's the claim? What's the evidence? Is there any evidence at all to support the claim? does the person making the claim have some sort of vested interest in spreading misinformation about the topic at hand? And then finally, what is the reasoning that links the evidence back to the claim? So these are a few tips from Cindy Otis, who is a former CIA analyst. She suggests reading widely across the spectrum, looking at respected publications on both sides of the political spectrum and finding where there's agreement and where there's disagreement. Also noting where the thinking on a topic has evolved over time, and then finally arriving at the prevailing school of thought. So if you do run across something online, often on social media, that you're not super sure about, my favorite method for doing a quick fact check is called the SIFT method. And the very first step is something that Melissa has already noted. It's to stop and do a gut check and see if the information is evoking some sort of emotion. So we often think about anger as the emotion that would come up with misinformation, but on the flip side, you have to watch out for something that makes you really excited or evokes joy, and you do immediately just want to share it. Either end of the spectrum is a red flag. The next step is to investigate. There is a technique called lateral searching that asks you to investigate the source of the information. So to do a lateral search, it can be as simple as performing a Google search and seeing what other people say about the organization or the person who has posted the information. Try to avoid going straight to the organization's website and only looking at the About Us page. Make sure you take the step to look at what others are saying as well. And then if you deem it necessary, the third step is to find better coverage, looking at what newspapers of record are saying. Is anybody reporting the same thing, or is this just something that is floating around social media? And then finally, trace claims to the original context. With images, you can do a reverse image search. You can try to find an original video, but fitting the claim back into its original context is really key. So this is an old example back from when Twitter was called Twitter. The 2020 election, this organization, Judicial Watch, tweeted that 8 Iowa counties have more registrations than eligible voters. And click once. So one way that you could go about fact checking this is to go directly to the source. So the Iowa Secretary of State tweeted out that this was false information. So particularly with elections, we want to really emphasize going to the local authorities when it comes to election information. The other thing you can do is that quick lateral search. It's usually pretty simple to just get an idea of whether an organization is an activist group or if they have some sort of political agenda. So moving into AI misinformation, which is something that's been mentioned in the chat that we've heard a ton about this election cycle, we wanted to talk a little bit about whether AI is a threat to the election. So this poll is from the Pew Research Center, and it shows that a majority of Americans are highly concerned that AI will be used to create fake information about the 2024 candidates. Another threat that we don't talk about quite as much is the fact that AI gives candidates a sort of plausible deniability to be able to say something was AI that they don't like. So it's just like another complicating layer of AI. So I wanted to mention cheap fakes versus deep fakes, because cheap fakes, which are a form of malinformation, taking an image or a video out of context, have shown themselves to be more of a problem than deep fakes, which are those AI-generated videos. So as an example of that, the News Literacy Project runs the site called Rumor Guard. And these are a couple of examples from the past week with Hurricane Helene. On the left is an AI-generated photo of Donald Trump wading through floodwaters. And on the right is, I think the text is probably too tiny to read, but it's a claim that President Biden was on the beach while this flooding was happening. So the image on the right of Biden is real, but it's taken out of context. It's from August 2024. So that would be sort of a cheap fake, whereas the one on the left is AI generated. And it's really small, but it kind of has like an airbrushed quality to it if you look at the larger image. And then on the other side, another example of a cheap fake is a video that's been circulating that claims that J.D. Vance has rented a dog to enhance his image. And that is another example of missing context. So thus far, one of the ways that AI has really been playing a role in the election is by firing up the base of candidates. This article is linked in our references, that it discusses the use of memes by Donald Trump supporters. The image on the screen is AI generated, but I don't think that anyone is imagining that it is potentially real. So they've really taken off as a way to act as a dog whistle and fire up the base, particularly Donald Trump's base.
This is another good spot to mention that the idea of emotions is not just it's not just on one side or another, right? Like the use of these kind of images are not meant to obviously share misinformation, like, oh, look, look what can happen. Trump can ride a lion, but rather create that kind of emotional response that will get people to buy into a cause or to continue sharing information that's not accurate.
So back in February during the New Hampshire primary, a robocall circulated of Biden asking voters to stay home, which it turned out was created by a Democratic consultant trying to raise red flags about how AI could be used in an election cycle. Needless to say, he's in a lot of trouble now, but I did want to play the recording just so you could hear how good the technology has become.
Sorry, that's on purpose. I'm just going to reshare so I can make sure the sound is working here. So give me just 1 second.
What a bunch of malarkey. We know the value of voting Democratic when our votes count. It's important that you save your vote for the November election. We'll need your help in electing Democrats up and down the ticket. Voting this Tuesday only enables the Republicans in their quest to elect Donald Trump again. Your vote makes a difference in November, not this Tuesday. If you would like to be removed from future calls, please press 2 now.
Okay, so I think it sounds, pretty good. I definitely think that if something like that were to happen, that it would alarm people. So again, going back to making sure that you confirm that information with an election commission or local authorities. So currently, Tennessee does not have a law regulating the use of AI by political campaigns. You can see on the map here, the states in blue or where laws have been passed in the states. In orange are states with laws under consideration. So I thought we'd play a little game just in the chat. If you want to play along, put whether you think the image is AI or not. Any guesses? The technology has gotten better and better. Gotta know. Yeah.
And if you want to share your thoughts on why or why not you think it is or isn't, feel free to do that too. Emily will tell you why it is or isn't, but
Cleaned up if not AI. Interesting observation. Yeah, Donna, you're on the right track. So this is an AI generated image, and the tell on it is the signs that are being held, or the big tell on it. Those aren't real words, okay, which is difficult. You really have to be paying attention to the details of a photo to notice that. But that's one of the things to look for if there is any text in an image, see if the text makes sense.
and don't be like me when Emily first showed me this. I just blamed it on being an old photo for some, like my head was like, oh, that's real. I can't read it because it's an old photo. I wasn't, I just wasn't thinking.
That makes sense too, though. Hey, what do y'all think of this one? Yes. Any guesses? So this one is real. And the thing that you'd want to be looking at here is the reflection in the water. Oftentimes the AI generated images will not have the reflection. And what about this one? All right, y'all got this one fast. Yeah, this one is AI generated. Does anyone who said I want to volunteer, like what the tell was for them that this was AI?
I may be wrong about this, but I don't, the uniform on Biden is totally out of place.
Yeah, he wouldn't
Yeah.
be wearing a uniform because he's a civilian. And the flag on it's also flipped. Yeah. So y'all got that one quick. That one stumped some students. So all that to say that the technology has gotten pretty good. You really have to pay attention to what you're looking at. So one thing that you can do is reverse image search. And there are a number of tools you can use if you're really interested in sleuthing. You can refer back to this chart that tells you which of these search engines is best at what sort of details. So Yandex is best with faces. Google is good with like locating whether a place is the one that is stated. So trying to locate like original context. So this is an image that I ran across last Friday during the storms, and I have to say that I fell for it. It raised some red flags, and I did a reverse image search, and I found it on a couple of local news stations in East Tennessee. This is I-40 in East Tennessee. So I thought like it would maybe eventually show up on a like a New York Times, a Washington Post in their coverage of Helene, because it seemed like a pretty amazing photograph. But the more I look at it, the more obviously doctored this looks to me. But if you do run across an image like this, Melissa, if you want to click again, the easiest way to do a quick reverse image search is if you're in Google Chrome to search with Google Lens and see who else has posted the image. I also, if you want to click to the next slide, did a search in, this is a free AI image detector, and you can see it's kind of split. I don't think this image was created by AI, not found anywhere that has verified this image. But I do think it was likely photoshopped, just erasing part of the road. So that generator judged that it was 41% artificial.
Emily, we've got a question in the chat. I'm wondering if you've come across with some of the research you've been doing, especially recently, is if people are relying upon visuals for as the main source of misinformation. Have you seen anything recently about whether written information or spoken misinformation is any higher or lower than visuals?
I haven't. I've seen a lot about videos taken out of context floating around. Images and videos are more likely to spark those emotions in us. So it would make sense for people who want to spread disinformation to maybe gravitate toward those. It's also, on social media, what's going to catch your eye would be an image or a meme over text, but I haven't seen anything specifically like running numbers on where's the greatest amount of.
I think that emotional tug-in is a really important piece of it, and the fact that with AI, it's so much easier to create either completely fabricated or doctored images and video now. So this is a good kind of transition to talk about just some other tools and tips that are available to help you avoid election misinformation. So Emily's already mentioned a couple, especially related to images and potential AI generated information. But a couple other tools, these may be ones that you have already used before. And if so, that's fantastic. But we'll have links to all of these in our resources that we share with you. But I think the key for sharing these is just remembering that you don't have to do everything on your own. To truly ensure that you're not sharing misinformation, you definitely want to do your due diligence and fact check. But there are a lot of expert groups that are doing up to the minute debunking and fact checking. We've seen this happen through the debates and all throughout the election season. But these are a couple of our favorites that we would recommend you bookmark and have available to check into. So one is from the News Literacy Project, which has a lot of amazing resources. This is a misinformation dashboard that basically sorts misinformation by theme and type. So this is an example of the different themes that they have, and then how much, what percentage of examples of misinformation are kind of sorted throughout those themes. So I like these because they are very specific to the election, and it will be able to help you kind of sort through some of those bigger issues. This one is from the University of Washington Center for an Informed Public, who again has a lot of really great resources, but this is the where they've kind of pulled together all of their election rumors and research they have done on that. So they're debunking rumors, particularly regarding election integrity and voting procedures, which we've kind of touched on today, but I think is probably one of the most disturbing sort of directions that we're headed in terms of misinformation and elections in particular is the amount, kind of like the robocall Emily shared a little bit earlier that we listened to. The fact that there is a lot of potential voter suppression happening because of misinformation. Tools like this are really useful for helping to kind of dig through that and see, what's inaccurate. We also like this one is also really good for rumors related to the elections. This is from the Brennan Center for Justice. And essentially it's a pretty simple site, but they're just fact checking rumors. It's a great spot to go if you've heard something that you're like, kind of to Melissa's point earlier, I don't think this is right. This seems a little too fantastic. It's a good quick spot to go. Okay, other ones that we've got links to, I don't have a slide for right now, but AP Fact Check, great resource. PolitiFact, there's a resource called the AI Incident Database that's got a lot of great information about fabricated AI images and videos. So we'll make sure you have the links to all of those. So we're getting close to the end of our time today. So we wanted to just give you a couple of just general takeaways. This is just sort of a wrap up of everything that we've talked about today, but maybe think about these as the things that you internalize to take with you as we go through the next 4, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, however many weeks we had to the election and beyond, because I guarantee this is not going to stop on November 5th. So checking your emotions, right? We all feel very passionate about our candidate of choice. We feel very passionate about where we hope this country is going or not going. And that's going to bring up a lot of emotions. When you're talking with your family and friends, when you're going through social media, when you're just reading the newspaper in the morning, just making sure that you do that gut check that Emily mentioned earlier. If you read something and you're angry, step away, especially if you're on social media. If something makes you mad, but alternately, if it makes you very, very happy and you just want to share it, take a moment and just step away and make sure that you have accurate information that you're sharing. We really recommend trying to err on the side of skepticism, not cynicism. It can be easy to just assume everyone has malintentions, but as we've seen, even in some of the more high-profile cases, the rumor mill conspiracies can go wild, and then it totally will distort the initial meaning of something. So just making sure that you're being a little skeptical, assuming good intent. But again, like Emily said earlier, you're not liking or sharing articles that you haven't read. You're having a little bit of skepticism there. Look for patterns. This is really helpful as you're looking at all of the different images and videos that you're seeing, looking for those kind of tells that we talked about a few minutes ago. And then always pause, take a pause. That goes to the emotions, but it goes to really anything that you're kind of examining. So, not just making those split reactions of, oh, that's fake, oh, that's real, right? Taking a moment to kind of investigate why.
Hey, and then everybody has that friend or family member that maybe you disagree with. Taking time to try to understand why they believe what they believe rather than jumping right into trying to correct them. Also talking with them about why you trust the sources that you trust. And then we've already mentioned this one a couple of times, but looking to local experts for that information that is locally relevant. If in the weeks before the election there is an uptick in misinformation surrounding local polling places or anything like that, just make sure that you go to the Election Commission or somewhere trusted. And I think the theme of the entire presentation is just take the time to dig deeper. And I don't think anyone has time or there's a need to fact check every piece of potential misinformation that you run across, but just being really thoughtful about what you share, what you relay to your friends and your family, making sure that you have done a little bit of digging if it's something that you're not quite sure about.
And as we said at the beginning, while we really hope that these resources and techniques will be helpful for you during the election season, we also really hope that you'll be able to apply all of this to everything that you encounter in your life, news in general, even beyond election-related information. It's easy to fall into the habits of just consuming and not interrogating, but it is something that is going to keep being an issue as we keep moving on in the world. So we will take an official pause here for questions, but I also just wanted to make sure you know that we've got some resources here that we will all of this will be available to you afterwards. Okay, question. Can you just bury your head in the sand? Yes, but then take it out and do some fact checking.
That's one of the things about misinformation, though, like the idea of flooding the zone. It just becomes exhausting to wade through all of the information.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, taking our heads out of the sand and popping up, I really appreciate what y'all have done here. Does anybody out there it's not TV land, is it? Zoom land?
Zoom land.
Have a question? You can unmute and ask.
We're also really interested if anyone has strategies or resources that you all use. We would love you to share that in the chat, or you can definitely unmute and jump in. I think Emily and I know a lot, but we don't know everything, and I'm sure there are tools that you all have encountered that would be helpful. Yeah, Debbie.
So, are you all planning to do any sort of research specifically around this election cycle? And how are you framing that research? If you are.
Yeah, great question. We don't have any plans to do any formal research. I think right now our goal is more of this kind of education and awareness building. Our colleagues, so at Vanderbilt, we have a really amazing resource called the Television News Archive that is recorded news broadcasts back to the 1960s, CBS, ABC, all of the main channels. So it's just continuous recordings. And so there's a lot of really good content there. And some of our colleagues in that department in the library are starting to do some narrative analysis projects looking at debates and misinformation over, how that has changed over the years. So they're still kind of in the early days of that research, but I think it's going to be really fascinating to see how those types of behaviors have changed in debates over the last several decades.
So actually, I have one follow-up question in terms of the debates in particular. In which we say, in past generations, people who ran for president or other high-level public office had actually had a lot of skills in debate teams and kind of formal kind of argument back and forth. Can you tell historically how that changes in terms of fact-checking, or is that a hard thing to note?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't looked into the changes in fact checking. I'm trying to think, probably a good way to do it would be thinking about the AP site and some of the other ones that we've mentioned to see, how far back do they go, and then what exactly are they looking at in past decades versus contemporarily. Yeah. You're giving me lots of ideas. I don't have time for all these research projects. Thank you, Debbie.
One of the things that I've noticed with fact checking is that it's now happening across many, many different platforms. So PolitiFact, for example, is that, but then the New York Times has its own, and Washington Post did whatever it is with the thousands or 30,000 or 150 or whatever number of thousands of mistruths from a previous presidential president. Presidential president or presidential. Those are increasingly now becoming politicized themselves, so that if someone says something and they say, I'm not going to do X, or I do X, or I did X, or whatever, that is used as well, that means that it's not completely an untruth because they say they're not. And I just will say that when I was a kid, I grew up in a place that is the hometown of Joseph McCarthy. And that is exactly what the press got into troubles with, which is that you just took whatever someone said as a politician or as a whatever and printed it. And it took a while for someone to then say, show me the 54 or whatever, show me that list, which happens to be your grocery list or whatever it was. And so I feel like we're moving back into some of that with some of these fact checking things, which is, So I'm just as a, it's the intention idea that also is becoming a very problematic thing from my perspective. The fact that we can't use certain things that have been said in other forum as a reason that someone would do something, someone in particular. And I think this is increasingly messing up our quote fact checking as well, because it becomes, well, that's not what they say.
Yeah, I think that's why it's so important to for all of us to be critical and inquire, and to really use our own judgment to examine the context of when and how something has been said, and to remember that everybody is human, right? Like that people do misspeak. It happens, even to the most polished presenters. And so I think you're right when it when it starts becoming the idea of fact checking becoming politicized can also be very dangerous. And so using our judgments on how much of that we want to dig into, and then what we feel we need to do ourselves.
Thanks.
That's a great point.
I read something recently that painting misinformation as the symptom, not the disease, and that, all the fact checking in the world is not going to help anything until, and this is way beyond my knowledge, how do we restore people's trust in foundational institutions? Which is...
So with that,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff way beyond our knowledge and our ken and our abilities and our whatever, but we chip away. That is what the League of Women Voters has been doing for a long, long time. And by the way, if you go backwards and you look at these debates, remember the debates at one point very early on, and Debbie remembers this because she watched it too, were done by the League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan political, nonpartisan organization. So anyway, thank you again, Melissa and Emily. This has been wonderful. And those of you who are still sticking in here, and even though it's 1:03 for y'all. It was great. It was fantastic. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure you are findable, your emails at Vanderbilt. So if anybody has anything that they'd like to follow up, I recommend Emily and Melissa are great resources. So thank you again.
Please do.
For everybody for being here. So
Thank you for having us.
Yes. See you in November.
All right. Take care. Bye.